English. Okay, ready? Hello, good afternoon. My name is Darcia Narvaez. I was a faculty member in our psychology department here, retired a few years ago to do public education, which is kind of the materials you have. And a few years ago, Eugene Malthouse contacted me after reading our book, The Evolved Nest, which is that material there, after hearing Gabor Mate talk about it. Yeah. He read the book and he contacted me, emailed and said, do you have a measure, essentially, right? Because he was doing some international measuring. And yeah, sure, here's ours. So we published, Peggy Wang and Allison Chang and I published an adult measure in 2016. And so I gave that to him, and you'll see it's used here. So very excited to introduce Eugene. He's at the University of Nottingham right now as a postdoc research fellow in, as you see, experimental economics. It's like, hey, learn technology, right? So anyway, but he is very much in tune with us. And Mary Tarsha, who's a graduate of the program also, the three of us then have several manuscripts in the works, and he's presenting one of them. So thank you. Welcome, Eugene. He's a wonderful fellow, very personable, very intelligent, very broad-minded, and most importantly, he's a new dad. Welcome.
It's going to be the biggest applause I get.
And rightly so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I am, as Darcia said, I am currently in the economics department, but I have a background in, well, initially in modern languages, and then I did my PhD in psychology, and then now I'm in economics. So I sort of maraud around a little bit. We'll see where I end up. But yeah, I got very inspired by the Evolved Nest concept and all the studies that have been done. So I'm going to talk through two studies today where we just try to extend some of that research with longitudinal data and also cross-cultural data. And a lot of it's to do with well-being, right? And I just thought it was worth putting up a definition of well-being, because I was in the airport and I saw in one of the shops there a well-being section, and it was like vitamin pills. And I thought, okay, well, not that. We're not talking about vitamin pills. What we're talking about is a state in which all aspects of a person's physical, mental, social, and spiritual life are good. Okay, so that's a working definition for today. So I thought it would also be worth just reflecting on what's well-being like in the UK right now. You maybe have a good understanding of what's happening in the US, but I wanted to give you a bit of a picture of how things are playing out in the UK and how things have been playing out this century. And I'll start with child well-being. This is a big longitudinal study that they run every year, and they ask thousands of children. This is age 15. How happy are you with life as a whole, right? Out of 10. And you can see that actually over the last 15 years, both for males and females, this is just on its way down. And they also ask about how happy are you with different aspects of your life. So you've got appearance, schoolwork, school, life as a whole, friends and family. And what this is the percentage of people who answer 4 or lower. Okay, so the proportion of people who are really not very happy with these aspects of their life. And you can see that this is kind of going up in a gradually increasing trend as well. It's not just what children say as well in the UK, it's actually, if we look at rates of anxiety and depression and even self-harm, this is all going in a negative direction. Okay, I don't really have time to talk about what exactly the y-axes mean, I'm just illustrating the direction here. And it's not just children, right? So adults in the UK, this is they ask the Office for National Statistics, they ask thousands of people every quarter, how anxious were you feeling yesterday out of 10, 0 to 10? And if you answer 6 or more, that you're classed as highly anxious. And you can see that about a quarter of the population are saying that, yeah, yesterday I felt 6 out of 10 or more anxious, which to me that's quite a lot. And again, it's increasing, and it's not just mental health, we can also see it in physical health, rising rates of depression in red, obesity. This is official GP records, so the obesity dips in 2021 during COVID, but also increasing, and hypertension quite high as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is physically and mentally in the UK, things are not amazing, and they don't seem to be heading in a very good direction. right? That's the takeaway. So what's going on here kind of raises the question of, are we raising children in ways that promote long-term well-being? And why the downward trend just this century? This isn't a very long period of time. What's going on? And I think the evolvedness is a good way of trying to understand this. Okay, it's a framework. We can think of it as a framework of childrearing practices that promote long-term well-being. This is Darcia's communal evolvedness flower. It's made up of 9 practices, which I'll talk through shortly in a bit more detail. But really, the background and the starting point is to say that every animal has a nest, and that can be a physical nest, like a bird's nest. But really, it means a set of things that it does to raise its young to become healthy individuals throughout life. And so, we're no different. We have practices that are shared with social mammals that have been around for 30 or 40 million years, but they are practices that are tailored to meet our unique biopsychosocial needs as human beings. These practices might date back 30 or 40 million years, but they're still around today, and a lot of where this comes from is observations of hunter-gatherer societies, contemporary hunter-gatherer communities who continue to implement all of these practices in the way that they bring up children. And we have to remember that these are the kinds of communities in which we spend 95 to 99% of our time as a species. And the other thing I think that is really important to emphasize is that they are supposed to be provided by a community. This is not saying that a mother or a father or just 2 parents need to do this. It's communal evolvedness, it's communally provided. That's saying it takes a village to raise a child. No one saw. So why might this be particularly critical for human beings? One of the reasons is that we're born with, our brains are really small compared to what they will be compared to lots of other animals, particularly the great apes. So if we take a chimpanzee as an example, it's just body weight here and brain weight here. When it's born, it continues to grow a lot. Its body continues to grow a lot, the brain not so much. Whereas the human at birth grows both body but also brain is increasing a huge amount more. So our brains are only 25% of the size that they will be at adult size, whereas for a chimpanzee it's like 35%. So we're so helpless and dependent on others, to the extent that one way I think is good to think about it is that we're like fetuses until we're 18 months old, if we compare ourselves to other hominids. So I often have that in my mind. They're like fetuses until they're 18 months, particularly in my torso. It was like just like a little fetus. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk through these practices in a bit more detail. And I also want to emphasize that, as Darcia mentioned, this is really hard in communities today. This was in Italy a couple of weeks ago. This is Rhea. And it's really hard. Okay, so I'm not. What we're talking about is societal level challenges and trying to help parents from that perspective rather than saying, oh, you need to be doing this or that. Okay? Yeah. I don't want to change the slide. All right, come on, I got to. Okay, so the first point is the welcoming social climate. Okay, it's the basis for this is that we evolved to live in supportive communities throughout life. That mothers evolved to have a built-in safety net of adult support. This comes from Sarah Hurley. And what does that mean in practice? It means that we try to provide routines of togetherness, not isolation. We ensure parents are well supported, and we create a sense of belonging and mattering for the child and for the parents as well. Belonging and mattering to the community. The second is soothing perinatal experiences, perinatal around the birth. I think it's useful to think about this both before birth. Expectant mothers need to feel supported by others because there's 40,000 synapses being formed every second while the baby's in the womb. So those experiences, the baby's feeling everything the mother's feeling, and gestational experience is really, really important. So much research on this in the last 10 years. We can think about during birth as well, baby deciding the birthday and following natural rhythms of the child and mother during the birth. And then the afterbirth period is really important as well, right? Baby and the mother should be together and not separated. They need to lay in for weeks. And there are lots of cultures where they have a time period that they refer to, so you might have had the first 40 days, but I think in Russia it's like 2 months, generally when mothers, it's a cultural norm that they lay in and then they bond with their babies. They're not trying to, head out the next day or go to work the next week or whatever it may be. So that's the second component, soothing perinatal experiences. The third, and I touched on this in the communal provision, is multiple bonded nurturers. Sometimes people use the term alloparents. And the background to this is to say that, well, Stephanie Kuntz made this point, children do best in societies where child rearing is considered too important to be left entirely to parents. And there's a guy, Nikhil Chowdhury, who I'll talk about him a bit. He has done lots of observations of the Bayaka people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And one thing him and his team observes in this community is that allo mothers or allo parents provide 40 to 50% of the total caregiving, right? So it's not just the mum the whole time, or the mum and the dad the whole time. And that this is not a unique thing, this is very common among hunter-gatherer communities. So he talks about the FA people as well, where 60% of the infant's contact is with allo parents, okay? And this is where we might start to see where the evolved nest framework differs a little bit from attachment theory, because that is very focused on the primary caregivers, whereas here we're saying multiple caregivers is really, really important. Okay. Number 4 is warm, responsive relationships. This is about reciprocal communication between baby and parent. They're mutually co-regulating each other, they're in synchrony, and when there's dyssynchrony, they're quickly repairing that to come back into synchrony. And babies' needs are met in the moment. Maybe you've heard this expression, it's Ashley Montague's expression. The baby needs a womb with a view once they've come out of the womb. This is one of the plots from Chowdhury studying the Bayaka people. What we're looking at here is the response time to infants aged 1.5 or less, or 1.5 to 4 years. And this is the cumulative percentage of bouts of distress responded to. And what you're essentially seeing is that within 20 seconds, almost all of the babies are responded to within 20 seconds, almost all the time. So they're not left to be left in distress, essentially. They're very, very responsive to babies. Okay, number 5, positive and no negative touch. Has anyone read this book, The Continuum Concept by Eugene Malthouse? Okay, well, I'm not going to say that's the one book you should read, because obviously I should say The Evolved Nest is the one book you should read. But this is a lovely book, short book by Eugene Malthouse. She went to live with the Aquila people in Venezuela and then wrote about what she was observing. And one of the things that she wrote is that the feeling appropriate to an infant in arms is this feeling of rightness or essential goodness. The premise that he's right, good, and welcome. Without that conviction, a human being of any age is crippled by a lack of confidence, a full sense of self, of spontaneity, of grace. So this really matters, right? This feeling of rightness that we get from being held, even into adulthood, right? And just to give you, so sometimes I think it's helpful to, well, what does that mean in practice? And again, more from Chowdhury, the Yaka hunter-gatherers, what he's observing is that infants under 1.5 years old spend, on average, 15 minutes in a 24-hour period alone, but alone means within, beyond 3 meters. And they're in physical contact 9 out of 12 hours a day, so 3/4 of the day they're in physical contact. They're held for over 5 hours. Okay, so we might think about, what do we see in our culture, and are we close to that, or it's very, very different. Breastfeeding, child-directed breastfeeding. I could have put 1,000 studies up about breastfeeding, but I think it's quite well established now that how important it is and how beneficial it is when it's possible. So it's not just this kind of static food stuff. It's a dynamic, it's tissue, right? It changes with the needs of the child by the time of day and the gender, produces antibodies, acts as an analgesic, painkiller. It's very thin, so it needs to be frequently ingested. And breastfeeding as a whole has many, many benefits, supporting development and protecting against all kinds of things. Okay, 3 more. Are you still with me? Yeah. Play, I think, again, this is such a well-researched practice, how important play is, fosters creativity, brain development, emotion regulation, risk-taking. And one of the things I think is particularly concerning is the lack of play that we see in kids these days in the UK. Maybe we can talk about what you guys see here. But many reasons for that. One study that just came out in the UK was looking at, well, what age are children allowed out to play alone? And they asked the kids and they asked the parents. And the parents say, well, when I was a kid, I was allowed out at, on average, 9 years old. I was allowed out alone. And for their children, it's 11 years. So just in one generation, we got kids being let out alone 2 years later. You think about all that time that you would have to sort of build your confidence and play in the world and sense of freedom. And yeah, these things are happening quite quickly, these developments. And if you want to know more about play, Peter Gray's your guy. Okay, he's written lots of books about play. Nature, immersion, and connection. Again, lots of evidence about how important this is for mental health. I'm going to show you, this is one of my favourite pictures. This came out in a report in the UK just a few years ago. And it's quite similar to what I was talking about before. They asked just one family, how far were you allowed to go on your own as an 8-year-old? How far were you allowed to roam? And they're looking at how this changes down the generations in one family. So this is near Sheffield. George, aged 8 in 1919, this is the great-grandfather. He was born here. This is his roaming space. He was allowed to walk 6 miles to go fishing, okay? Off you go, yeah. See you later, right? This is George's roaming area in 1919. He has a son, Jack, who's 8 in 1950, and he's allowed 1 mile. He's allowed to go to the woods on his own. Okay, then we got Vicky, the mother, in 1979. When she's 8, she's allowed half a mile, so it shrinks again. And then we got Ed today, who's allowed 300 yards as an 8-year-old. So, you just think about the child's mind here, and then this enclosure from that to adopt is, and again, this just comes back, it's not the parents' fault, right? Because no kids are out like this, so you can't, it's very difficult to be the one parent who says, go forth, my child, 6 miles. You'd probably be arrested. I don't know. Yeah. So I find that very powerful. And then the last practice is regular restorative healing. And we can think about that in a few different ways. We need to heal as a community. We need to have rituals for, it might be dancing or singing or celebrating or grieving, of course. We need to heal our relationships with others. We are going to have disagreements with people. We need to be able to reconcile and have time and space for that. And we might need to heal ourselves, right? And that's just reconnecting with the self. It might be meditating. I mean, that doesn't have to be meditation. That can mean anything in that realm. But regular practice is really important as well. And I think it's important to say, all of these practices, except breastfeeding and soothing perinatal experiences, apply to adulthood as well. So let's not think of this as, this is just some stuff we need to provide for children. We can think of this as being really important throughout our adult lives, how nested we are. So why do we think this is a good framework? For me, I think it's a great way of drawing on theory to bring together specific practices that collectively fulfill our biopsychosocial needs. They're millions of years old, so we can argue that actually human infants evolved to expect these practices, and that helps us to understand where well-being goes wrong when those expectations are met. They are also designed not to reflect any specific cultural context. So has anyone done work with the adverse childhood experiences and positive childhood experiences? So one of the criticisms here is that these are a little bit culturally specific, whereas the evolved nest is doesn't apply to any specific culture. And the last question is, how have we implemented this, which is what I'm going to talk about next. I thought I should just take a pause for a minute if anyone wanted to ask anything, or just take a deep breath. I'm going to have some water.
Eugene, I just want to underscore what you said. One of the most important things you just said here was that infants are evolved to expect these things. That's the most important thing. Infants are born expecting an environment of a certain kind. And whether we provide that or not is really the key question we should address.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. Okay, so here's the first study. This is with Darcia and Mary. So, usual thing of any difficult questions applies to direct them there. And this is our model. This is longitudinal data, and essentially we're focusing on four things here. Maternal EDN, evolved developmental niche. So whenever you see EDN, just think evolved nest. We're thinking about the mother's own evolved nest experience when she was a child, thinking about her well-being as an adult, her child's evolved nest experience, and the child's well-being. And essentially what we're trying to do in this paper is to just think about how do all these things relate to each other, and how do we make sense of this? How important are they? So the sample is, it was 220 mothers from a US Midwestern community. I wonder which one. I don't think anyone who's in our age. It's quite a homogeneous sample of 75% white and similar kind of socio-demographic, socioeconomic background, age 29 at the first time point. They were observed 7 times over the first 6 years of their child's life, and we have multiple measures of maternal and child well-being, which I'll go into. So let's start firstly by thinking about that first item on the left-hand side, the maternal evolved nest experience. So this is how I joined this project quite late on while all the hard work had already been done. So this is how Darcia and Mary measured this. They used the Evolved Developmental Niche History Questionnaire, and it looks at several components of the evolved nest. So mothers were asked about positive touch, how often you affectionately touched, kissed or hugged. Negative touch, did you ever receive corporal punishment? 2 items for free play, how frequently they played with other children inside and outside. Family togetherness, how often they did things together as a family at home and outside the home. Responsiveness, how responsibly your parents or caregivers to your needs. There were 2 other items here. One is overall, how happy was your childhood, and how supportive were your parents in providing something along those lines. Can't remember the third item. Shouldn't have started, should I? You're always in trouble. And then positive and negative home climate asks, how frequently did you feel certain feelings and emotions, things like feeling expansive and serene, and how frequently did you feel fear and anger and guilt on the negative side. And essentially we just kind of average these together and create an overall evolved nest composite score to reflect the mother's childhood experience of the nest. The second part of this first part A is the child's evolved nest experience. And we asked this when the children were aged 4 and 6, and it's quite similar in the sense that we're trying to just pick out components of the nest. And we asked them in the past week, on a scale from never to several times a day, how much essentially did your child experience positive and negative touch, free play, and family togetherness? And again, we average these together to create an overall composite score. Okay? Makes sense? All right. So what we find is that a mother's own reported experience of the evolved nest in her childhood is positively associated with her child's experience of the evolved nest at age 4 and 6. And what I'll present throughout here is this is the dots are raw data, and the points are raw data, and the line is an estimate from a multi-level model that controls the income and education and time. Okay, so we can see that the mother's own experience of the nest positively related to the child's experience of the nest at age 4 and 6. So that's path A. Okay, so let's look at path B, maternal evolved nest experience and well-being in adulthood. We had 3 measures of maternal well-being. We had secure attachment, close relationship questionnaire, so mothers reported how well this little bit of text described them. This is for secure attachment, so how easy it is for them to become emotionally close to others on a scale from 1 to 7. We had depression using the Beck depression inventory. We had 3 measures, once after the baby was born, then at 3 months and 6 months. This is like a 21 item scale. And then we had stress as well, perceived stress scale. So we had 6 measures of stress at all time points except at age 4. And this is using Cohen's measure. So things like, in the past one, how often have you felt nervous and stressed? Never. It's very often. And what we find here is that, so maternal Edian experience is everything's standardized just to make it comparable across everything. Greater experience of the evolved nest, reported experience of the evolved nest, more secure attachment for mothers. Depression, slightly weaker relationship, p-value is not significant. And for stress, mothers, greater experience of the evolved nest in childhood, less stressed across these time points as well. Okay. All right, how about maternal well-being and child evolved nest experience? Because that could be what's going on here, right? It could just be that mothers are sort of feeling better, or better able to provide the nest. And yeah, we do find some evidence for this. So we just use the measures of well-being that we have at the particular time points. What we find is that more securely attached mothers at age 4 provide the evolved nest for their child, slightly more at age 4, and more stressed mothers at age 6 are less able to provide the evolved nest for their child at age 6. So I think that's in line with what we'd expect. Again, controlling for income and education. Path D is, this is quite an interesting one. Is it really the case that children who experience the evolved nest are actually, are we seeing better well-being among those children? And we have 3 measures of child well-being. So we've got anxiety. This is a 14-item preschool anxiety scale, looking at lots of symptoms of anxiety. We had depression, so how often does your child worry or have difficulties of peer relationships? Again, symptoms of depression, 10-item scale, and social engagement as well, looking at how much your child shows kind of socially engaged behaviour. And this is all reported by the mother, so there's potential limitation, but it's the best we have here. And what we find here is a positive relationship between the child's experience of the evolved nests and their well-being. I think with the exception of depression at 4 years. So we've got evolved nest experience on the x-axis and well-being on the right-axis. You can see that more nested children, if you like, less anxious and more socially engaged at age 4, and less anxious, less depressed, and more socially engaged at age 6. Okay, so we find a strong relationship here. And the last thing we looked at is, well, what about maternal and child well-being? To what extent are these things correlated? And again, we do find that child well-being is affected by maternal well-being, but less strongly than their experience of the evolved nest, which I think is quite important. So here we've got maternal secure attachment. The only thing where this has any relationship is with the child's social engagement, so more securely attached mothers, more socially engaged children. And with stress, we have more stressed mothers, slightly more anxious children, and less socially engaged children as well. Okay. So we do find a relationship here, but as I said, I think it's not as strong as the child's own experience of the evolved nest for their well-being, but it does matter. So that's the summary of our paper and our model. And what we think is interesting is that a lot of the research so far has been looking at a child's experience of the evolved nest and their well-being, or an adult's experience of the evolved nest in childhood and their well-being. What we're showing here is that this extends across generations. Okay, and this is why we put half F in, because that child might become a mother later on in life, and then the whole cycle sort of starts again. Okay, so that's where we see the strength of the paper is demonstrating the intergenerational effects of providing the nest, and that suggests that any policies that support parents to provide the evolved nest can extend the benefit not just the child, but actually future generations as well. Okay. All right, let's do another little break. Yeah.
So, I don't know if you may know this, but you guys probably do. Were these all first-time mothers, or was this, it could have been, they could have had any
Yeah,
number
we
of children?
probably know that in the data, but no, it was a mix, yeah.
Okay. And I don't know if you had ever looked at if there were any effects of child order, birth order, so if they were like
We
the
also
second or
looked
third.
at, we have data, but
Okay.
yeah,
Good. Okay.
we have, I think the numbers are too small.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
so,
I was just curious.
Yeah, what were you
no, it's a good question.
Oh, I was just wondering if there were any effects
Right,
based
yeah.
on if they were like first-time mothers or
Yeah.
or even younger mothers versus older mothers.
Yeah. No, I think we're probably a little bit small on the sample to look at that,
Yeah.
but definitely,
Yeah.
definitely interesting. Yeah. Birth order. Lots of people writing about birth order right now. It's a hot topic. Yeah. Okay. Any other? All right. Should we move on? Okay. So this second study is about what we've looked at here is well-being benefits of experiencing involved nest in a small Midwestern community sample. But what about across cultures? Let's wonder about that. So this is the second paper. It's called Evolved Nest in Childhood: Relation to Adult Well-being and Social Capital Across Cultures. And I think it's just worth starting about what we're talking about. What we mean by social capital. Is this a term that people are familiar with or have come across before? Yeah. Okay. It's quite broadly used, not very well defined. I think this is quite a nice way of thinking about social capital. The glue that holds societies together. Okay, it's like the levels of trust, the things that just oil the wheels of everything. Right, you can't do anything if you can't trust people in society. But one of the ways of breaking it down a bit and thinking about it is to think about three sort of variants of social capital. So we can think about social capital on a collective level, right, which is a shared resource that fosters community-level cooperation. Then we can think about it on a relational level. So what are the social connections between the individuals in a community? And then there's also just a sort of generalized individual-level social capital, so a person's level of trust and just more generally their cooperative values and attitudes and predispositions towards others. And it stands to reason that the more of this, the more you get, more likely you are to be in a sort of collective, a community that has high collective social capital. So in this study, we were looking at adults' reported experience of the evolved nest in childhood and several dimensions of their well-being and social capital. So we had a dimension for personal well-being. I'll talk about what these are a bit more. We looked at their social relationships, so that relates to their relational social capital, their general pro-sociality towards others, which is the generalized social capital. And then we had, and this is where the economicsy bit comes in for me, which is the incentivized pro-sociality. So what we do is get people to play these games. People come across like the dictator game and the ultimatum game and the trust game. I'm getting a few blank faces here. That's all right, I'll explain it. There are these games that economists like to use, and you give people money and then you just try to test how cooperative they are based on what decisions they make in these games. Because for an economist, they might say, well, it's all very well believing what people say, but what happens when there's money on the table? Okay, so it's an alternative measure of pro-sociality. And essentially what we were expecting were positive associations between involvement, experience, and well-being and social capital across cultures. But that wouldn't necessarily be true, okay? Because there is an argument that some people make that parenting practices across the world might be adaptive. So what I mean by that is evolved nest practices they promote interdependence with others, okay? And it might be the case that providing the evolved nest in independence-focused cultures like the UK and the US, you could argue that's maladaptive because people need to get used to living in a society that isn't very interdependent. So maybe actually experience the evolved nest might be negatively correlated with well-being because you set up your child to believe that they live in a world of interdependent beings, and then they're like, wait, this isn't how the society works. This is very confusing. So that is one argument. So maybe we'd expect that. but we'll see. Let's find out. So we had 1,400 participants across Japan, and this was a GMO Research, is a Japanese survey company, and we used prolific academic in the UK and the US, all aged 18 to 34. We thought memories of the evolved nest would be a bit fresher at this stage of life, and they were broadly comparable in terms of their socioeconomic status. So we used it's called the MacArthur ladder of subjective socioeconomic status. So you show people a ladder with 10 rungs on it, and they're numbered, the rungs are numbered. Number 10, these are the people with the best jobs and the highest incomes and the most educated, and then number 1 is people with the worst jobs, the least educated. And where do you stand on that ladder? And the average across these 3 countries is people say about 5, okay? And a decent spread as well. And our procedure, so everything was done online. We got people to play these economic games I'm going to tell you about. Then we recorded the personal well-being measures. Then they did the evolved nest questionnaire. Then we had the social capital measures. And then we did collect some demographic data at the end. Okay, so it was a relatively simple survey. And before we look at the results and the methods in more detail, my old PhD supervisor, when I was telling him about this study, he said to me, well, isn't this nestedness just like resources? You know, isn't it the case that just if you're wealthier, you have more resources, you've got more time, and that allows you to create more of the evolved nest for your child? And I thought to myself, no, but I didn't know how to back that up. So here's some data that might illustrate this. So what we got here is that response to the MacArthur ladder on the x-axis and developmental nestedness scores. And initially I fit a linear model, and you see, okay, there is a positive relationship. But if you fit a quadratic model, actually the model fit improves. And what you see in each country is that, yeah, it does help being a little bit higher up on the subject. I'm going to use the UK because it's it does help being a little bit higher up on the socioeconomic ladder, right? Because you're just not struggling so much. But there's a point at which actually beyond that becomes unnesting in a way. Presumably because, I don't know, you're out working lots of hours, or you're sending your children to boarding school, or whatever it may be that we can speculate. But I thought that was worth sharing. This is not just saying that wealthier people create the nest more. It's much more complicated than that. And so to measure evolved nest experience, we used the EDNH questionnaire. It has developed a little bit since it was used before. So now all the items have five item scale from 1 to 5, and we look at positive touch, we look at negative touch. These are the exact same wording in the questions as before. Family togetherness, self-directed social play, and responsive care, and then positive and negative home climate. And I put the correlations and the alpha scores up, which is quite consistent for some of these measures. Okay. Anyone want to stare at this a bit longer, or should I move on? Okay. So that's our independent variable for basically the whole study. And now what you might be thinking is, well, can we really trust people's reported experience? Like, really? Like, how well do people remember their childhood? And one thing we did is ask a bunch of people in America, actually. 2 weeks later, we gave them the exact same questionnaire. And actually what we find is that it's very, very strongly correlated, what they report first time round and what they report second time round. And the other thing we looked at is whether changes in their reported life satisfaction or happiness, did that change how they reported their childhood? And we didn't find any evidence of that either. Because that's another criticism. Or maybe people are just happier and then they report a more nested upbringing. But we didn't find any changes in happiness affecting people's reports of their childhood. So I think that's quite reassuring in terms of what we're capturing here. And so let's look at well-being first. Okay, we had loads of measures. We used ONS, that's Office for National Statistics. This is what the UK government uses to measure well-being in the UK. They use 4 questions. How satisfied are you with life nowadays? To what extent do you feel things you do in life are worthwhile? How happy did you feel yesterday? And how anxious did you feel yesterday? And then they have another question: how is your health in general? 1 to 5, very bad, very good. So that's an initial section of wellbeing questions. We also use the 18-item primal world belief scale. Are you familiar with this concept of primal beliefs? This is Jeremy Clifton in Pennsylvania at UPenn. And what he's trying to get at is, what are your beliefs about the world? You know, to what extent do you believe that the world is a good, safe, enticing place? Where do those beliefs come from? So he's got a huge research project on this. And that was an interesting question for us, because your beliefs about the world affect your well-being, right? If you think the world is dangerous and competitive the whole time, it's harder to live well. We also included a personal relative deprivation scale. So what this is trying to get at is, how do you feel relative to others who are similar to you? And this is correlated with health and happiness as well. And what we did, I would have liked to report each individual measure in the paper, but for simplicity, what we did is scale all the responses within each country and average them, and then create an overall personal well-being score. And what we find is it's quite strong in each country that the more nested individuals report much stronger well-being, again controlling for income and education in Japan and the UK and the US. And it's quite a high R squared in each country here. Okay, should we move on? Oh, actually, yeah. One of the things about the composite, overall score is it's hard to know what does this mean in practice, right? So what I've done for this US audience is to look at the coefficients for each of these measures. So what does a 1-point increase in nestedness get you? Well, it gets you a 1-point increase in happiness yesterday, a 1-point decrease in anxiety, almost a 1-point increase in life satisfaction and health and beliefs about the world as well. And all very statistically significant. So I think maybe that's useful to sort of see what that means in practice. Okay, social relationships. We used Office for National Statistics, but also OECD measures. So we asked people, how satisfied are you with your personal relationships out of 10? That's what the OECD used. To what extent do you agree that you can rely on people in life if you have a serious problem? And do you feel like you belong in your neighbourhood? Then we use the close relationship questionnaire, like I mentioned before, to look at your attachment style. And same thing, we scale responses and average them to create an overall score. And it's quite a similar story. I mean, slightly lower R squared in Japan, but in the UK and the US as well. Greater self-reported experience of the evolved nest, higher relationship satisfaction or better social relationships, which we know are really important for health and well-being, right? And again, if we do what I did before with the US, you can see that probably the strongest relationship is personal relationship satisfaction. So a 1-point increase in nestedness associated with a 1.3 increase in your satisfaction with your personal relationships. But also even ability to rely on others, neighbourhood belonging. Oh, yeah. Okay, third dimension was general prosociality. So we asked people, this is World Values Survey question, in general, how much do you trust most people, 0 to 10? And we also asked them, how much do you trust people from your family or personally, who you meet for the first time? People of another nationality. I'll come on to why we did that in just a second. And then we had a bunch of questions about what economists call social preferences. So things like altruism, positive reciprocity, negative reciprocity, to what extent you sort of feel like you should punish others when they treat you unfairly, how patient you are, how willing you are to give things up for benefits in the future, and how willing you are to take risks in life as well. So this is kind of a standard global preference. Economists talk about the global preferences survey quite a lot. They like this as their set group of questions that they use to measure social preferences. And again, yeah, we find, apart from in Japan, in the UK and the US, we find that more nested people report higher general prosociality, higher generalized social capital towards others. Okay. Now, I just wanted to linger on that trust question a little bit, because I had another colleague who said, well, is it the case that you might just be increasing trust in your in-groups. Like, is nestedness just about you really trust your community, but on the other hand, you're less trusting of people outside of your in-group? And again, I was like, no, I don't think so, but I needed something to back that up. So we used value survey questions which ask, how much do you trust people, members of your family? And you can see that more nested people trust members of their family more, and they trust people they know more, but also people they don't know and other nationality. If it was the case that more nested people just trusted their in-group, then these should all be downward sloping, right? But actually, oh, you're joking, I didn't get the thing to disappear. Okay, that's why you shouldn't do slides just before a talk. You just have to take my word for it. But Japan is flat, but UK and US trust increases beyond your in-group. Oh, what a shame. That was the highlight of the whole talk. Okay. All right, so then we get on to this incentivized prosociality. So I don't really probably have time to go through all of these games, but let me tell you about the trust game, because I think this is one way of trying to understand how much do people really trust others. So let's use Darcia and Mary as an example. Okay, so but you don't know, the thing is, all these studies are conducted online, right? So it's all anonymous. You don't know who your other participants are. But I say to Darcia, you're player A and you're player B. And I say to Darcia, okay, you get $10. How much do you want to send to Mary? Whatever you send gets tripled. And she then gets to decide how much to send back to you. How much would you send to her?
Oh, 6.
Oh, you said 6. All right, so you get left with 4, and you got 18. How much do you send back?
Do I know that it triples?
Yeah, you know that it triples.
Okay, 18.
You'd send all 18. You get nothing. Okay, so the trust game.
She's more nested.
highly illustrating the point. So the trust game, economists use this to measure 2 things. You've got the trust, because you've got how much does Darcia trust Mary, what she's going to send back. But then you've also got positive reciprocity, because Mary's like, well, you sent me a little bit, you trusted me, how much do I give back? Okay. So there's one way of trying to understand.
I'd give her 10.
You give it 10. Okay. Dictator game is very simple. You just say, Darcia, you get $10. How much do you want to give to Mary? That's it. You get to keep whatever you don't give. Okay, that's probably the simplest game.
That's the one I was thinking of.
That's the one you think. Oh, right, okay. So you give 6. And then there are a couple others, but don't worry about them too much. And then the last one is just an honesty game. So you say to people, okay, flip a coin 10 times, count how many times it landed on heads, and you get $1 for every heads that you report. And you never actually verify it, so you're just trying to get a sense. If someone says 10, they're probably being dishonest, but you don't know. And essentially, yeah, what we find is no relationship between nestedness and this incentivized prosociality at all. And we talk about this a fair amount in the paper, about why this might be. But one reason is, as I was kind of alluding to, these games are often played in online, anonymous settings. So you've taken out a lot of the social aspect of the interaction, right? Because you never know who you're playing with and whether that money ever gets to them. So yeah, no relationship there at all.
And that shocked the economists.
Oh yeah, they don't. Yeah. Because one interpretation as well, clearly, this is just what people report, but what they do in practice, there's no relationship there. But I disagree with that interpretation. Okay, so the last bit of this paper is what we wanted to look at is, are there some underlying factors within this evolved nest framework? Can we do a factor analysis and try to sort of reduce it down a bit and find underlying factors? So we did that, and it came out quite nicely actually, in the sense that we found 2 factors. One, grouping together positive experiences, and one grouping together negative experiences. And it was quite similar in the loadings in each country. So these ones ended up being all the positive experiences that made up the positive experience factor, and then you got these 2, negative climate and negative touch, create a negative experience factor. And then we give a score on that factor to each participant, and then we look at to what extent does these factor scores predict well-being and social relationships and prosociality. And when we can look at these things independently. And so what we find here, you've got blue as positive experience factor score, and red as negative experience factor score. And you can see that in every country, positive experiences predict well-being, and actually the same here for negative experience, slightly weaker in Japan. But, so these things are independently important for well-being. It's not just negative experiences that we need to focus on. Same story for social relationships. Positive experiences slightly more predictive of social relationship quality than negative experiences. And similar story for general prosociality in the UK and the US. In Japan, we have something slightly interesting going on, which is where negative experiences actually lead to higher general prosociality as well, which we can discuss. And we find no relationship whatsoever with incentivized prosociality again. Okay. So I think this is just important to say because, a lot of the research is focusing on adverse childhood experiences, and what I think these results show is that, we should care about adverse and negative childhood experiences, but the positive stuff is just as, if not more important as well. Okay? And I think lots of your papers speak to that as well. So what we find here is that recalled childhood experiences involve best associated with adult well-being and social capital across these three countries. Positive and negative experiences independently associated with well-being and social capital outcomes. As I just said, lots of focus on ACEs, but positive experiences maybe just as, if not more important. And we also found that a weaker relationship with general prosociality in Japan. And one explanation that we give in the paper for that is that the Evolvedness questionnaire does focus mainly on your family and your community. And so in Japan, the idea of general prosociality towards others is so widely encouraged. They have these concepts like amai, giri, ninja, all of these are about oneness with others and harmony with others. So all of these things are encouraged far beyond family and the community environment. So that might be why the effect of your immediate family is weaker in Japan, because actually it's all encouraged across the board. And we find no associations between evolved nest experience and incentivized prosociality. All right, so let me bring it all together. I've talked about two studies showing the relationship between evolved nest experiences and well-being during both adulthood and beyond into the next generation. We find that these results hold across cultures, so I think that shows that the EDN or the evolved nest fulfills human needs, right? It's not the case that trying to make infants independent from day one is going to make their well-being better off in an independent, focused society. Why the downward trends in the 21st century? Well, I think there's a few reasons, and we could talk about this. Lots of people writing about this. One thing is that as societies have become more unequal and competitive, that changes the values that we think are important to instill in children. So there's a good book called Love, Money and Parenting by two economists looking at this and showing that as countries become more unequal, the society feels the need to instill hard work in their children much more, because the stakes are suddenly higher, right? It really suddenly matters whether you get into a top university and you get a top job, because your earning potential is 10 times. Whereas in a less unequal society, whether you're a banker or a teacher or a bus driver, it doesn't matter so much. So you don't need your children, don't need to be working them every hour under the sun. The other thing that I mentioned, the longitudinal study at the start, done in the UK, showing happiness declining among children over time. One of the things they talk about over this 15-year period is the erosion of collective responsibility for looking after children. We seem to be becoming more individual, more nuclear family-oriented. The other thing which I think is people are starting to write about, but I think we all see it, is, do people know this concept, phubbing? Okay, this is a new word for everyone. This is phone snubbing. Okay, so you know when you're in a social interaction and then someone gets their phone out, I'm snubbing you and I'm looking at my phone. Okay, people have talked about it in the context of parents, because this is happening a lot, right? Parents just looking at their phones, being distracted from their children. And that's going to undermine so many of the practices of the evolved nest. And I feel like it's a bit of a blind spot, actually. We put so much emphasis on, oh, it's the children on the screens and they need to spend less time on the screens, and maybe we need to look in the mirror a little bit. Next up, we are doing more with longitudinal data, so we're working on a big data set called ALSPAC in the UK, which is about 15,000 people finding the evolved nest and looking at how that predicts well-being outcomes in adulthood. And PAC stands for Parenting Across Cultures. This is a big project run out of Duke. 1,500 kids have been followed for 20 years, and we're looking at evolved nest experience and well-being outcomes in adulthood. So lots more to come. And I'll just finish by saying thank you. Here are the references for the papers, which will hopefully be published soon. I'm here till Monday, so happy to chat with anyone. And here's my email. And I think this takes to my Google Scholar page, but I haven't checked it. So. All right, and then hopefully, we've got time for some questions and some discussions. Yes, Mary.
Thank you. It was awesome, Eugene. Great. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about Japan, because there were some differences. I mean, you spoke a little bit about this communal context.
Yeah.
So some more ideas. I mean, the evolved nest is communal, and so what are your thoughts in terms of how we can be capturing this, or even just some of the non-significant findings there?
Yeah, I mean, having spent some time in Japan, it is very noticeable their communal approach to bringing up children. I mean, even you see kids getting the underground, the subway from a really young age, and to school or whatever, and there's a real sense that everyone is looking out for the children the whole way, so the whole time. And so I think that as well maybe speaks to the impact of the nuclear family is less, particularly on things like general prosociality and social relationships, is less immediately important, because across society, social harmony is the emphasis. And the same is true for well-being. They think about well-being very differently. In our culture, well-being often comes down to avoiding negative emotions, like anxiety or depression. In Japan, one of the things that really determines well-being is your social relationships with others. So that might be another reason why actually the evolved nest, it very strongly predicts social relationships in Japan, because this is much more part of well-being there, and your harmony with your social relationships. That matters a lot more in Japan than it does in the UK and the US. To the point where actually saying how happy are you to someone in Japan is a slightly odd question. They're like, well, why is that? Really it's about, what are my relationships like with others? Do I have much conflict? Yeah. So it's hard doing that study across cultures, because well-being means really different things, and the effect of the nest. Yeah. So that's why we thought it was worth testing that.
I'm thinking about the question that Adam asked you about new mothers or veteran mothers or birth order. When I was born, my parents had relationships. They had grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins nearby. When my younger siblings were born, it was just us, just the siblings, so more isolating in a way. Is there a sense that young, near-age siblings can be part of the provision of evolved nest experiences? Is that part of it? It's not just parents, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think often what's immediately apparent is how much those siblings want to be involved. And they actually are very nurturing by nature. They're keen to help out, aren't they? I mean, I don't know about you, were you keen to help out?
I had to help out.
There you go, yeah.
Families were bigger back in the day as well, right?
Yeah.
So everyone grew up within the nexus of overlapping family members and generations, right?
Exactly.
Now we think that a nuclear family is some thing we should aspire to, but not really, right?
No.
It isolates parents and isolates families,
Yeah.
and I think undermines our intergenerational nesting experience.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is something, so one of the things that Nikhil Chowdhury looks at is, well, who are the alloparents?
Yeah.
And it tends to be split between aunts and uncles, grandparents, siblings, and unrelated people as well. So there's far more of it's not just the grandparents, it can be any number.
Is there any advantage to thinking about daycare experiences as part of the network of alloparenting?
Yeah, what we've seen in daycare in the UK is they get split by, and actually this happens in school as well, is you get split by age group. So the 1 and the 2-year-olds will be in a different room to the 3 to the 5-year-olds, and so you're kind of cutting off that possibility of alloparenting from a 5-year-old. So it might be something to think about. And then obviously we do that all the way up through school as well.
I've enjoyed the talk immensely. Thank you.
I'm trying to think how this connects to the sociology and economics, intergenerational literature. My understanding of that literature is whatever variable you regress between parents and children, you're going to find a positive correlation.
Right.
But then it's very hard to make a causal claim that it's actually income of the father that is causing income of the son, or happiness of the mother that is causing happiness of the daughter. Yeah. So, are you making some causal claims here that it's actually the nest itself that gives the nest to the kid?
Such a minefield of a question. I mean, obviously I have to say no, because at this stage we don't have the causal evidence, and it's so hard to find random variation or to manipulate early life experience, right? You do kind of have to work with the data that you have. I mean, what I would say is that there is causal evidence on individual components of the nest. Toxic stress and particular experiences that we have causal evidence for. So I would say when you put that together, it's more than just correlational. But I don't think we're quite in a position to be able to say, you look like you're about to disagree.
Well, it depends on which aspect of science you're looking at. If you're looking at evolutionary systems science, that, we're mammals, and mammals have had these practices for millions of years. And so you bring that in as part of the evidence. You can't just have experimental kind of experiments we expect now. It's just you can't do it. You can't assign children to be touched or not, babies to be touched or not, or breastfed even. You can't make it happen. Yeah. So you have to bring in the other sciences and the clinical sciences. What are the outcomes for these kids who don't get whatever? And then you knit it all together. And so that's sort of the evolvement theory is doing that.
Yeah, and I would add.
Yes, please.
Okay. And I would add, if you take science on its own terms, the strongest evidence is converging evidence, right? And so that's what we're talking about here, looking at converging evidence from individual studies, from an evolutionary perspective, looking at the converging evidence for a specific component, both when it's implemented, when it's not implemented, right? And like Darcia was saying, putting that all together, and we see this convergence happening. So
I mean, I think Jonathan Haidt makes a similar point about screens as well, like in terms of it's hard to find causal evidence that the phone more time on social media is not good for children, but he emphasises that actually if we're looking at converging evidence, multiple studies, right, at some point we have to say, okay, on balance.
So I said earlier that I retired to do public education, and so these handouts are the thing we're doing, is trying to educate the public about the evolved nest, so that parents, but grandparents, teachers, everyone learns about it. And we have a nesting ambassador program that we're running now to help anybody in any walk of life adopt the principles and practices of the evolved nest and then use them wherever they are. So teachers, we have people from around the world, nature, educators, and therapists and such. And the yellow handout I created for a talk I gave to social workers a few weeks ago. Just that, you pin it on your bulletin board. This is how you can re-nest yourself, or your clients, or your parents, or your kids, whoever you're working with, right? Just do one little nudge thing every day, because that gets us back into our species' normal way of being connected and collaborative.
Darcia's nested me into species.
My husband.
I've been nested. I am species normal.
Well,
Maybe.
She's nested me too.
and it's mutual. We're mutually nesting each other with our gifts, right? Everyone has their strengths.
All right. Well, thank you all so much.